professor of the bar, so I learned Jesuit. But these boxes. They had covered it with Clara to make it look like it was hanging. And we were in the church. Yes, all the drivers. Oh, I remember, yeah.
Congratulations on your great month.
Thank you. Oh, please. Thank you. Thank you. Congratulations on your Oh, wow.
I mean,
Oh, that's great. Oh,
yeah. Okay, we're going to start in just a minute. Welcome everyone to the first keynote talk in the César Chávez Symposium titled A Man for Others, César Chávez and His Legacy. I'm Professor Garcia in the Sociology Department and also the Director of the Latin American Studies Program. We, many of us decided in an advisory committee, organizing committee, to put the symposium together on the 25th anniversary of Chávez's passing. We had a memorial mass for him on April 23rd, attended by many members of his family, including his sister, Rita Medina Chavez. So I'd like to thank many people who have made this symposium possible before I turn the program over to Professor Emeritus Francisco Jimenez, Department of Modern Languages and Literatures, who will introduce today's speaker. I'd like to thank first and foremost Dean Debbie Tomasabi of the College of Arts and Sciences for her support throughout the organization of this program and also for a generous grant to enable us to do so. Very special thanks to Lulu Santana, Director of Campus Ministry. Without her help, we could not have put together the beautiful and spiritual Mass that we had. Thank you very much, Lulu. The Latin American Studies Program, the Office for Multicultural Learning, the Office for Diversity and Inclusion, Bon Appetit Management Corporation, and the Adobe Lodge. I'd also like to thank the Ignatian Center for Jesuit Education. And as you can see, many units on campus provided support, help, funding for this. There were many departments who also gave funding and supported this program. The Department of Modern Languages and Literatures, the Anthropology Department, English, History, Political Science, English, Religious Studies, Ethnic Studies, especially with the help of Professor Alma M, the chair of the program, of the department. Sociology, under the direction of Professor Enrique Pumar, the chair. The Sociology Club, the Student Club Mecha El Frente, the other student club, SCAP, which is a long-standing organization here that does community involvements for students. The Latina faculty group that has been in existence many years, and I'd like to thank Sister Ana Pineda for taking the spearheading this program. The Latino faculty group has brought us together as a faculty and helped build very strong networks, and in so doing, helping us to be better mentors for students. I'd also like to give a very special thanks to Susan Babel, the office manager of the Department of Sociology, for helping me put together all the fine details of the program, and most of all, she was not able to be here, for being patient with me when I was the most nervous and neurotic about putting this program together. So a very special thanks to her, and again, a very special thanks to Professor Enrique Pumar for providing her services. We started organizing this program last August, and I would like to give a very special thanks to the organizing committee members. Ana Sampaio, I've already introduced her, from the Department of Ethnic Studies, Enrique Pumar from Sociology, Francisco Jimenez, and a very special thanks to Helene LaFrance and Nia Olmsted, who could not be here from Oradre Library. They helped in every aspect of the publicity and also put up with me. And also very thanks to Marie Brancati, who just walked in, for her helpfulness and her knowledge of putting together the program, especially the involvement of the surrounding San Jose, Santa Clara community. She's from the office of the Dean of College of Arts and Sciences. It is now my pleasure and honor to introduce to you Francisco Jimenez, Professor Emeritus of Modern Languages and Literatures, who introduce today's speaker.
Before I do that, I think I'd like to thank Dr. Garcia for organizing the symposium. She has worked tirelessly for over, I would say, about a year. So I think she deserves wonderful applause. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce to you Professor Mario Garcia, whom I consider a friend and a person I admire and I have known for many, many years. Currently, he is a distinguished professor of history and Chicano studies at the University of California in Santa Barbara. He received his PhD in history from the University of San Diego, and he has taught in a few universities, at Texas El Paso, at the University of Texas at El Paso. As a matter of fact, he received the Distinguished Alumni Award from his alma mater. And now he is, what's the term that they use when someone is honored by their alma mater and they put a plaque in the entrance to the university.
I hope it's not deceased or something.
It's not deceased. But anyway, it's a great honor to be in that to be recognized by your own alma mater. So congratulations on that. He's also taught at San Jose State University and was professor of history and American studies at Yale University. Professor Garcia is a prominent, probably the most prominent scholar in Chicano studies, and he has published numerous books, over 20 books. I will only mention a few of them. Desert Immigrants, the Mexicans of El Paso, 1880 to 1920. The Mexican Americans, Leadership, Ideology, and Identity, 1930 to 1960, both published by the Yale University Press. The Gospel of César Chávez, My Faith in Action, Católicos, Resistance and Affirmation in Chicano Catholic History, the Latino Generation, Voices of the New America, the Chicano Generation, Testimonios of the Movement, and his latest work, the novel, In the Chicano and Latino Experience. I don't think he sleeps. He is also the recipient of the Oral History Association's 2016 Stetson Kennedy Award in recognition of his career of oral history scholarship in the service of social justice. And I could go on and on and on. But on a personal note, Professor Garcia has strong ties to Santa Clara University. His wife, who is sitting here, is also a distinguished professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and she and Professor Garcia, Mario Garcia, were married in the Mission Church. Their daughter, Juliana, was baptized by Father Logatelli, who was president of Santa Clara University, and she was baptized in the chapel here in the Mission Church. And it goes on. As you probably know or may not know, he is also the brother of Dr. Alma Garcia. So it gives me it's my honor then to present to you Professor Mario Garcia.
much, and thank you all for being here. Francisco Jimenez just left out one member of the family who also has a connection with Santa Clara University, which is my son, Carlo, who was also baptized here. I think, right? So we have a strong connection to Santa Clara. We always love coming here. I do want to thank Professor Alma M, for, of course, arranging these series of presentations around César Chávez and inviting me to come speak. And my good friend and colleague, Francisco Jimenez, 2 years ago, I had the honor of introducing him at UC Santa Barbara because we awarded him the Distinguished Award in what we call the Distinguished Award in Chicano Latino, the Luis Leon Award for Distinction in Chicano Latino Literature, and we awarded it to Francisco Jimenez for his wonderful creative writing. And I also want to acknowledge my good colleague and friend, Professor Juan Velasco, who is also here. He's been very supportive, and congratulate him again on his wonderful book on Chicano Latino autobiography, which is one of the first of its kind about that genre. And I was going to mention the Santa Clara connection, but you stole my thunder, but that's okay. I also want to mention the last time I spoke here, and it was on when the book on César Chávez was first published, Gospels of Chavez. My mother was still alive. She was sitting right there, and I dedicated the presentation to her, so I want to rededicate this presentation to my mother. But I also want to dedicate it to another good friend and colleague who's no longer with us, Professor Alma M. So I want to start first by reading to you my most recent blog that I do for the National Catholic Reporter online service. I won't read all of it, but I'll read just a little bit to kind of position ourselves where we are right now, historically speaking. What the Trump administration is doing against undocumented immigrants is cruel, inhumane, and a crime. It's a crime against humanity. It's apprehending people in this country that fled poverty and crime in their own countries. This includes women and children. It's breaking up families and separating children from their mothers as they plead for refuge. It's making people feel unsafe to even walk to the store to pick up their kids at school. It's making DACA youth anxious about their future, any future. All this is wrong, wrong, wrong. What this administration is doing is a violation of God's law, of God's love for his children. Jesus ministered to all people, and he loved and embraced all. He fed, clothed, and nurtured the sick and the needy. He did not ask for their legal status. There is a higher law. As Catholics, we know this, and we have to obey it. We have to live the gospel message without distinction as to race, class, gender, or sexual orientation. We have to live out Matthew 25 to take care for those in need. This is the basis of Catholic education. This is what we learn in Catholic schools. It is the message of liberation. Jesus was a liberationist. He had a preferential option for the poor and oppressed, as we should also. As Catholics, we have to live out this liberationist message. But do we? We can't all be Mother Teresa, we can't all be César Chávez, but we can do what we can, and we do it because it's the right thing to do. This is not just materially helping the poor, but also protesting against injustice. We need to oppose what the Trump administration is doing, not only to the undocumented, but to this country. We need to oppose the cutbacks in social programs and in education, on the environment, and to stop the furthering of the military-industrial complex. We need to protest the growing economic inequities around us, where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer and more homeless, and the middle class keeps sliding backward. Justice, social justice, is what we need to build our lives around. This is what it means to be Catholic. Without a commitment to social justice, we are not Catholics. This is our call. César Chávez spoke as a prophet. A prophet is someone who inspires us to think of what the right thing to do is. A prophet observes and points out the injustices around us and how we need to address them. A prophet is someone who challenges us morally. Yes, prophets like John the Baptist can be voices in the desert, but there are also voices around us and within us. We just need to listen to them. César Chávez was a prophet, and he spoke out on the plight of the poor and oppressed, in particular the farm workers. He reminded us that a society is defined on how we treat the lowest among us, and if we truly love them. His prophecy is most true prophecies with both spiritual and political. it was faith politics. Spirituality and the political were two sides of the same coin in Chavez's prophecy. Spirituality or faith inspired his political commitment. And what was that commitment? It was to bring justice and human dignity to farm workers and other oppressed people inspired by his faith. This is the kind of prophecy we still need in our society, and we can have no better example of this than César Chávez. So I'm going to be talking about this book that first came out in 2007, and it's my main contribution to the literature on César Chávez, which is really quite voluminous. And it's called The Gospel of César Chávez, My Faith in Action. The title, The Gospel of César Chávez, was not my title, but my publisher decided, Sheet Ward, they came up with the title. And at first I was a little concerned about that title, the main title, The Gospel of César Chávez, because I grew up, as you did, thinking that there's only 4 Gospels. And here I'm producing a 5th Gospel. So what are my good Catholic clergy friends going to think about this? And so I was a little concerned about it. But, when the book was ready to be published, they sent it out to get different people to give us quotes with the back of the book. And lo and behold, they sent it to Cardinal Roger Mahoney and Los Angeles, and he gave us a very, very nice and embracing and supportive quote. And I guess I figured, well, if he didn't have any problems with the title, then I shouldn't be concerned about the title myself. So here we go, The Gospel of César Chávez. And but the origins also are that some years ago at UC Santa Barbara, we invited probably at that time the best known and most published Latino theologian, Father Virgil Elizondo. And he came and gave a series of lectures and also began to actually teach classes for us, both undergraduate classes on Chicano Latino religion and also graduate seminars. Because we didn't have anyone to teach Chicano Latino religion. And in fact, when you look at the curriculum of Chicano Latino studies, there's still this huge gap in terms of religion. It just doesn't exist. And it's just mind-boggling, because how can you study any ethnic group without studying religion? And whether it's good or bad, but you have to study it because that's what the people embrace, different religious perspectives and faiths. So anyway, Father Virgil came and he gave a graduate seminar that I attended on contemporary mysticism. And he chose to include César Chávez as a contemporary mystic. He also included Dorothy Day and many others. That started me thinking, maybe I can do something along those lines. And that got me going in terms of trying to better understand César Chávez's spirituality. So I gave myself a task to go out and read as much as I could on most published by Cesar, interviews with him and so forth. And I found all of these powerful reflections on his spirituality. And that's what this book is about. It's not a biography. It's almost actually autobiographical, because it's coming from his words and all about his spirituality. So that's the nature of the book. But it was Father Elizondo who inspired me, and he was kind enough, as you know. How do we get the images going? He wrote a preface for a foreword for the book. So I'm going to show you some images that are in the book as I take you through what's some of these very powerful quotes. But let me first ask the question, because I don't, when I teach my Chicano Latino history courses, I don't take anything for granted. I don't take anything for granted in terms of what the students may or may not know. So I don't take for granted that they know who César Chávez was. And that especially came to my attention when, in 1993, when Cesar died, one of my colleagues in one of our Chicano Studies classes announced to his class that César Chávez had died, and what a great tragedy this was. And one of the students said, "Yeah, what a tragedy, what a tragedy, he was such a great boxer." He meant Julio César Chávez, who was a great boxer, but wasn't the Cesar Chávez. So I don't take anything for granted that students may or may not know. I also ask students, well, when this birthday of Cesar Chávez, not necessarily the year, 1927, what was the date? Oh, they canceled Professor Garcia. Well, March 31st, right? Oh, okay, yeah. Well, March 31st is like a state holiday, right? And we're supposed to, not that the students get the day off, but they're supposed to reflect on Cesar's legacy. And I ask my students, even when I teach my large introduction to Chicano studies, 500 students, how many of you remember on March 31st spending any time in your high schools thinking about Cesar Chávez, reflecting just a few minutes? Well, my God, so that's still a challenge, obviously, that we face. At the same time, we know that Cesar Chávez clearly is the most well-known Chicano Latino figure in the world. I can't think of anyone who would rival him. So Cesar Chávez, of course, was a great leader of the farm workers. I mean, his place in American history, which I think is solid, is that he accomplished what had never been accomplished before. He successfully organized farm workers. People thought it couldn't be done. They had tried it, and they had not succeeded. But Cesar did it. Si se puede, right? That's what his mantra came from. You can do it, we can do it, si se puede. And he did it with a lot of hard struggles, as we know. Cesar, of course, came from a farm-working family. He himself had worked in the fields. He was born in Arizona, but the father came to California in the 1930s, part of the Great Depression and all of that. Cesar says that he went to almost like 40 elementary schools. He had no more than a high school education, than a grade school education. And when you read these powerful quotes, you think that Cesar was a trained theologian, maybe a PhD in theology, but no, he had no more than 8th grade education. And the family settled in Central Valley, in Delano, and then he was in World War II, toward the end of it, so he's part of the greatest generation. And then after the war, he married his girlfriend of many years, Helen, who then became Helen Chavez. They migrated and settled in San Jose, and they settled in East San Jose, in an area that was called Sal Si Puedes, get out if you can. said something there. But there he met his parish, Father Donald McDonald, who embraced him and kind of got him under his wings. It was Father McDonald who introduced Cesar to the life of Gandhi and nonviolence, to the Catholic encyclicals on social doctrine, and then he introduced him to an organization called CSO, a community service organization, led by Fred Ross, an incredible organizer. And it was through CSO and through Ross that Cesar in the 50s learns how to be a community organizer. And he learned that the basic philosophy of being a good organizer is that you have to be a good listener. It's a lost art. It's a lost art. I tell my students, you have to be a good listener. That's why I show images in my class, but I don't put a PowerPoint with outlines and stuff like that. Because I said, I want you to learn how to take good notes. And that means you have to listen. And so he learned that you become a good organizer by listening to the people and what their needs are. What do they want? What are their concerns? You don't go in there as an organizer and say, okay, this is what we're going to organize, because that's not going to succeed. You have to organize them around what they're concerned about. He rose up to the ranks of CSO, but his dream was always to go back to organizing the fields. And so in 1962, he leaves CSO because he couldn't convince CSO to organize in the fields. They said, no, it's too hard, it's been tried, it can't be done. So he then went in 62 and started the beginnings of what eventually becomes the United Farm Workers. He brings in Dolores Huerta and other people. And they moved to Delano, and Delano becomes, of course, one of the major capitals of the later Chicano movement. But as he said, there was no real particular historical reason to go to Delano. It's just that we had family there, and we knew it was going to be hard times, and we could fall back on family in Delano. And so over the next several years, he works hard to try to bring in farm workers into the union. And then in 65, of course, with the Filipinos who were already unionized, they approached him to strike against the big grape growers in the Central Valley. Cesar wasn't sure that his union was ready, but eventually he says, yeah, we've got to be in there with our brothers and sisters, the Filipinos. And so on September the 16th, 1965, that tells you he was already planned what he was going to say. On Mexican Independence Day, he said, yeah, we're going to go out and strike. 5 years of strike, the longest strike in American agricultural history, 5 long years. Lots of marches, marching to Sacramento in 1966. And then, of course, the use of the boycott against table grapes, which really was what broke the backs of the growers because they were losing money. And sending out farm workers all over the country, and even into Canada, sending them to Europe to organize boycotts and so forth. And Commerce was very much involved in that, of course. And then in the summer of 1970, again, achieving what had never been achieved, finally getting the growers to sit down and negotiate the contracts. And the first time that the growers agreed to unionization for farm workers. Of course, the story doesn't end there. There were many, within 3 years, the growers didn't want to resign. They wanted to sign with the more conservative Teamsters. And the struggle went on. And the struggle went on all the way till Cesar died in 1993, and the struggle still went on. A lot of work has been done on Cesar, a lot of scholarship is over. Some of it is somewhat a little bit more critical in recent years. But to me, anything that, showing Cesar that, showing that maybe he did have some faults and so on, which to me it just humanizes him. Even though in a way when I could be accused of canonizing him to a certain extent, but I recognize him as a human being, and with all the frailties that we all have as human beings. But it also, his position in American history is well said in terms of accomplishment and never been done before. So that in a snapshot, for those of you who know that less well about the history of Cesar Chávez. So I think also in terms of content of, before I read you some of these quotes, that you have to position it also in the 1960s, the 60s struggles, but from a more religious, spiritual point of view. You have the context of Vatican Council II, which calls for the church to become more relevant to the modern world, more open and so forth. I think that's part of the context that directly and indirectly we can position Cesar's thoughts on spirituality and so forth. But also the liberation theology, which emanates out of Latin America and was the reaction of some of the Latin American clergy to Vatican Council II in terms of how do we make the church more relevant to the modern world. And many in Latin America, the clergy, said, well, we live in societies that we have a lot of poverty, we have a lot of oppression, and unfortunately our church, in many ways, in some cases, has been on the wrong side rather than on the side of the poor and the oppressed. So we now need to move in the other direction. We now need to have, as the liberation theologian said, we need now to have a preferential option for the poor and the oppressed. And that's, in many ways, the nutshell of liberation theology. We need to go back to the roots of the church, which is what liberation theology also said. We need to go back to the roots. Well, what are those roots? Those roots are the Jesus story. And Jesus was a poor man, and he ministered to the poor. And that's what the church has to do as well, go back to its roots. And Cesar, I think, again, directly or indirectly, was influenced by liberation theology. I don't think Cesar ever read liberation theology, but of course he practiced liberation theology. He already had a preferential option for the poor and oppressed. So that, I think, in terms of context. Caesar's spirituality begins, at home, through his mother and his grandmother in Arizona, where they were growing up, where he was growing up, and his siblings. And so they represented what some of the theologians, especially feminist Latina theologians, refer to as abuelita theology, the theology of the grandmothers, but also mothers. And so some of the reflections about that, for example, Cesar said, my mother would tell us, you always have to help the needy, and God will help you. And then Mama Tea, his grandmother, gave us our formal religious training. She was always praying, just praying. Every evening she would sit in bed, and we would gather in front of her. As we knelt by the doorway to her room, we would join her in the rosary that seemed to drone on endlessly. We were required to kneel until the prayer was over, and if we started giggling, she would hit us with her cane. After the rosary, she would tell us about a particular saint and drill us on her catechism. But Cesar also mentions that he learns from his mother and his grandmother about nonviolence. It didn't take Father McDonald many years later to teach him about nonviolence through Gandhi. His mother and his grandmother also always said, you don't strike a God against others physically and so forth. You just don't do that. And so he already had a commitment or an embrace of nonviolence. One of the chapters in this book is entitled The Power of Faith. And one of my favorite quotes, he pretty much says it all. This is a quote that seems to have come from after many years of struggle and of organizing. He was asked, probably by a journalist or someone else, what has kept you going? I mean, how have you, over all these years in the 60s, and even in the 50s, 60s, organizing, farm work and so forth, ups and downs, defeat, successes, defeat, what has kept you going? And he said the following. He said, today, I don't think that I could base my will to struggle on cold economics or on some political doctrine. I don't think there would be enough to sustain me. For me, the base must be faith. That's it at all. That's it at all. It was his faith that sustained him. That's what kept him going over the years.
His faith in the movement or faith in God?
His Catholic faith, his spirituality. And so some of these images that I've chosen to use in the book kind of show Cesar in spiritual moments. But other very powerful reflections on the power of faith include, for example, to me, religion is the most beautiful thing. And over the years, I have come to realize that all religions are beautiful. Your religion just happens to depend a lot on your upbringing and your culture. That's a very important quote because, yes, Cesar was Catholic, but he was also ecumenical. And that's one of the influences of Vatican Council II. Because what Vatican Council II did, among other things, was for the church to say, yes, we believe in our faith as Catholics, but we're no longer going to tell other people that it's the only faith. And we're not going to tell other people that unless you're Catholic, you're not going to be saved. We're going to respect other faiths, other Christian faiths, other non-Christian faiths. That was ecumenism. That's what it was all about. And Cesar was ecumenical. And if you see the pictures of the marches and the demonstrations, you see not only Catholic clergy, you see Protestant ministers. In fact, one of the first significant support that he got early on was the so-called migrant ministry, which was a liberal Protestant organization. He got that even before he got Catholic support. And he had Jewish rabbis and people in the Jewish community also supporting the farm workers, and so he had this ecumenical view. It didn't mean that he wasn't Catholic, but it meant that he also respected other faiths and other religions. And so that quote speaks to that. He said, there are three elements to my faith. It's God, myself, and my brother. And sister too, we can add. You have to remember, and some of these quotes are like in the 60s, where people would still use like man as kind of a generality for humans and so forth. I don't think he was excluding women when he would use these more masculine terms. He said, I'm traditional, I'm Catholic, traditional, I go to church regularly and faithfully. But besides that, I also have what I consider a renewal religion. I go out and do things. That's what I think is a real faith, and that's what I think Christ really taught us to do, to go out and do something. We can look at his Sermon on the Mount, and it's very plain what he wants us to do. clothe the naked, feed the hungry, and give water to the thirsty. It's very simple stuff, and that's what we've got to do. In the union, we have what we call our social commitments. And those are things that we do for other people, not in the union. We commit ourselves to go help people outside, and everybody in the leadership has this commitment. For instance, today one of the leaders went over to the state prisoners. That's a commitment. Another one is going to the hospital. We've got to give our faith an essence through deeds. So Cesar believed not just in, he believed in practicing your faith, not just in, thinking about your faith or praying, but going out and helping others. Another section is entitled Human Dignity, because so much of what the farm workers were about and what Cesar was about, yes, they were striking for better wages. The conditions of farm workers in the 1960s, when Cesar began to organize, were very dire. Very poorly paid, awful working conditions in the fields, pesticides used against them, poor housing. Their kids, also like Cesar himself back in the 30s, had little access to education and so forth. And so they clearly were the poorest of the poorest and the most oppressed of the oppressed. And so yes, they needed material help, and Cesar and the union were attempted to do that, to get them higher wages, better working conditions. But in many ways, the struggle was also to bring human dignity to the farm workers, because they were not being treated humanely. They weren't being treated as human beings. They weren't being given that dignity, that respect. So much of the struggle was also about human dignity with respect to farm workers. And so Cesar reflected that in some of his moments of spirituality. He said, it really doesn't matter in the final analysis how powerful we are, how many boycotts we win, how many growers we sign up, or how much political clout we possess. If in the process we forget whom we are serving, we must never forget that the human element is the most important thing we have. If we get away from this, we are certain to fail. And he said, our union is not just another union. It is a movement more than a union that seeks to change the conditions of human life. For that reason, we resist giving our members numbers. Once we do that, we are frightened that we will become one mass. Our people are human. They are not numbers. He said, many things in farm labor are terrible, like going under the vines that are sprayed with sulfur and other pesticides. You have to touch those leaves and inhale that poison. Then there's the heat and the short-handled hose and the stooping over. So many jobs require stooping. They should find a way of doing this work that will leave the human being whole. I think it can be done, but it won't be until one or two things happen. Either the employers begin to see the workers as human beings, or the workers organize against the employers and demand changes. All my life, I have been driven by one dream, one goal, and one vision: to overthrow a farm labor system in this nation which treats farm workers as if they were not important human beings. That dream was born in my youth. It was nurtured in my early days of organizer. It has flourished. When a man or a woman, young or old, takes a place on the picket line for even a day or two, he or she will never be the same again. He or she has confirmed his own or her humanity. Through nonviolence, he has confirmed the humanity of others. So the issue of human dignity was very, very central to Cesar and to the struggle. They were not just fighting for material things, but they were fighting, in many ways, for their own spirituality, their own human dignity. He, of course, had great concerns, obviously, for the poor, because the farm workers were poor people. And as I said, I doubt that he read liberation theology, but he practiced it, of having his own preferential option for the poor. And to that extent, he reflected People are not going to turn back now. The poor are on the march. Black, brown, red, everyone, white included. We are now in the midst of the biggest revolution this country has ever known. We shall strike, we shall organize boycotts, we shall demonstrate, and we shall have political campaigns. We shall pursue the revolution we have proposed. We are sons and daughters of the farm workers' revolution, the revolution of the poor seeking bread and justice. To know that our cause is just, that history is a story of social revolution, and that the poor shall inherit the land. And then on the issue of self-sacrifice, he reflected, when we are really honest with ourselves, we must admit that our lives are all that really belong to us. So it is how we use our lives that determines what kind of men we are. It is my deepest belief that only by giving our lives do we find life. There's the Jesus story right there. I am convinced that the truest act of courage, the strongest act of manliness, is to sacrifice ourselves for others in a totally nonviolent struggle for justice. To be a man, and I think he would say a woman, is to suffer for others. God help us to be men and women. We are working towards creating the new man in the fields, the man who will think of the common good as you and I do, instead of the man who thinks of himself first. In giving of yourself, you will discover a whole new life of meaning and love. It all comes down to the question of what we are going to do on earth. Are we here to make money? Are we here to just get what we can for ourselves? Or are we here to do something for our brothers? You really can't help people unless you are willing to sacrifice yourself. Because first, there are always greater demands upon your time than you can take care of. And second, everything you do becomes controversial. So you have these attacks against you all the time. That is a sacrifice. If you are not prepared for those two things, you cannot help people because you cannot take the pressure. So it seems to me that if one understands that it is part of the sacrifice, then you take it, live with it, and even sometimes accept it. It is my deepest belief that only by giving our lives do we find life. To give, we would say obviously, to give is to receive. Of course, Cesar is best known for nonviolence. Again, he learned that from his mother, from his grandmother. Father Donald introduced him to the life of Gandhi. And of course, Gandhi was also known for his nonviolence and bringing independence to India in a nonviolent way. César Chávez also had great affinity with Dr. King, Martin Luther King Jr., and his concept of nonviolence, which also Cesar shared and which he tried to also emulate and put into practice. So it's not surprising that I would have found so many of his reflections on nonviolence. This is a very powerful quote because it really speaks to all of us, and you have to kind of really think about it. He said, I am not a nonviolent man. I am not a nonviolent man. I am a violent man who is trying to be nonviolent. That's right, well, we all have violent tendencies, right? To strike out at people who attack us or to do things to us. I mean, that's maybe our initial inclination. And Cesar said, I'm no different than anybody else. I'm a violent man. But my struggle, your struggle, is to become a nonviolent person. And so that's a very, very powerful quote. And of course, you have to put it in the context of the attacks on the farm workers, the growers, the police, all of the forces against the farm workers, and how he had to try to make sure that the farm workers did not strike back. You know, for Cesar, nonviolence, yes, in part it was a strategy because he knew that if the farm workers became violent, I mean, they would be destroyed. I mean, they didn't have, I mean, to stand up to police and who knows what other forces would be used against them. That would be, you know, a strategy that simply would not work. So yeah, he saw it as a strategy, but more than that, for him, nonviolence was not just a strategy, it was a way of life. It was a principle that he based his life on. If you believe in the sanctity of life, as he obviously did, you do not harm another human being. If you believe in human dignity, you don't harm another human being. You respect their human. You may be opposed to them, you may have your differences with them, but you don't hurt them because they are God's children too, and they have human dignity. And so, you know, he obviously took, you know, he emphasized that in his own concept of nonviolence. However, we should understand at the same time, and he spoke to it, his concept of nonviolence was not the stereotype that some people have, well, you just kind of turn the other cheek, or you just, you know, you become passive. Is that, no. I'm not talking about passivity, Cesar would say. He used the term militant nonviolence. That meant, yes, we're nonviolent, we will not harm other people physically and so forth, but we're going to go on strike, as he obviously did. We're going to boycott, we're going to organize, we're going to pressure in Sacramento, we're going to pressure in Washington. That isn't being passive, that's being militant, nonviolent. We're going to be active, we're going to be aggressive in pushing pushing our rights and our call for us to be respected as human beings. So we should not misinterpret his concept of nonviolence as kind of like doing nothing. And so he said, people equate nonviolence with inaction, with not doing anything. That's not at all. It's exactly the opposite. Gandhi never said don't do anything. He said exactly the opposite. When he brought independence to India, that wasn't passive. He said exactly the opposite. He said do something, offer your life. He said if you really want to do something, be willing to die for it. That's asking for the maximum contribution. Through nonviolent action in this nation and across the world, social justice can be gotten. To be nonviolent in a monastery is one thing, but being nonviolent is a struggle in the struggle for justice is another. You reap what you sow. If we become violent with others, then we will become violent among ourselves. Social justice for the dignity of man cannot be won at the price of human life. You cannot justify what you want for la raza, for the people, and in the same breath destroy one life. I will not compromise. Racism is wrong. Racism is not the way. Nationalism is not the way. Nonviolence is more powerful than violence. We are convinced that nonviolence supports you if you have a just and moral cause. Nonviolence gives you opportunities to stay on the offensive, which is of vital importance to win any contest. It is now clear to me, Cesar, because he was nonviolent in part, like Dr. King, like Malcolm X, like many others, like Muhammad Ali, came to oppose the war in Vietnam. A very, very controversial war. That unjust war. That war, not of necessity, but a war of choice. I tell myself, what was that war all about? We lost 60,000 American lives, maybe about 5,000 Latino lives as part of that 60,000. We lost that war, but now we have Kentucky Fried Chicken in Vietnam, in the unified Vietnam, under communist rule. We have Kentucky Fried Chicken, we have McDonald's. What was this war all about? Couldn't we have Kentucky Fried Chicken without that war that we're losing 60,000 American lives and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese lives? What was this war all about?
2 million.
There we go, 2 million Vietnamese. And some of you may have seen the recent movie The Post, which is about the Pentagon Papers. Those Pentagon Papers, of course, we already knew them, revealed that even at the time that President Johnson, after he had succeeded the assassinated President Kennedy, when he started saying military combat troops in 1965, Pentagon Papers revealed, Johnson knew already that the United States could not win this war. He knew that the United States could not win this war, this guerrilla war, this jungle war. He knew it, and the documents indicate that. But yet he, because of his own ego, and because he did not want to go down as a president that sold out Vietnam or South Vietnam to the communists, he sent young boys there, young men, to die for his ego and for his pride, and shame on him, right? Shame on LBJ, you know, and LBJ would have been considered one of the greatest presidents because of all the social programs, Medicare and bilingual education and the civil rights laws that he passed. Clearly one of the great domestic presidents, but he will never be considered, unless things radically change, one of the great presidents, because he'll always have Vietnam as that albatross around his neck. You know, it was an unjust war. It was an unnecessary war. It was a war of choice. And Cesar also came to oppose the war in Vietnam, and he said, "It is now clear to me that the war in Vietnam is gutting the soul of our nation. Of course, we know the war to be wrong and unjustifiable, but today we see it has destroyed the moral fiber of the people. Our resistance to this and all wars stems from a deep faith in nonviolence. We have to acknowledge that violent warfare between opposing groups, be it over issues of labor or race, is not justifiable. Violence is like acid. It corrodes the movement's dedication to justice." Of course, not only was he committed to the struggle for human dignity, for the poor and the oppressed, but all that also was linked, of course, to social justice. And so, again, it's not surprising that many of his spiritual reflections would deal with issues of social justice, because social justice is also a spiritual issue. It's not just a political issue, it's also a spiritual issue. It's how you see people, how you treat people, humanely and so forth. And so he said, this is very powerful, if I'm going to save my soul, it's going to be through the struggle for justice. We want radical change. Nothing short of radical change is going to have any impact on our lives or our problems. We want sufficient power to control our destinies. This is our struggle. It's a lifetime job. The war for social change and against social injustice is never ended. We seek our basic God-given rights as human beings because we have suffered and are not afraid to suffer. In order to survive, we are ready to give up everything, even our lives, in our fight for social justice. We shall do it without violence because that is our destiny. The work for social change and against social injustice is never ended. We are men locked in a death struggle against man's inhumanity to man. For me, Christianity happens to be a natural source of faith. I have read what Christ said when he was here. He was very clear in what he meant and knew exactly what he was after. He was extremely radical, and he was for social change. And he would have, I'm sure, added social justice. Other themes that are covered are his reflections on pilgrimage, on fasting, of course. I mean, Cesar is also known for the long fast that he took, his first 25-day fast in 1968, and over the course of his life, many other fasts that people feel weakened him physically, so that led to his death in 1993. He said about fasting, fasting is probably the most powerful communicative tool that we have. It communicates, but not through the written or expressed way. Fasting communicates through the soul. It is the most potent way to communicate that I've ever seen. And as we know, his first major fast in 1968, early 1968, the first 25-day fast was done because he began to hear stirrings among some farm workers that now, after 2 or 3 years of the strike, nothing was happening. And they felt, well, maybe this whole nonviolent thing is not working, and maybe we need to like destroy some property and things like that. We need to be maybe move in another direction. And so Cesar, of course, was totally opposed to that. And so he, in part, did his first 25-day fast to bring attention once again to nonviolence. And it succeeded because the farm workers saw his courage in doing that, and many of them came to his, to join him actually in fasting as well. So for Cesar, fasting was both personal as a way of kind of cleansing himself also, not just physically but spiritually, but also indicating, again, the message of what the struggle was, which was for human dignity and for social justice, and for nonviolence, or to be done in a nonviolent way. I'll conclude by there's a section here, a very short section, on death. And he has a wonderful statement, his own prophecy on his own death, in a way. And I've been forgetting to show you some of these images of Cesar here, again, some of these spiritual moments. The ever-present Lady of Guadalupe behind him. He had a special devotion to Guadalupe, as most Mexicanos, Mexican Americans do. Here's on the pilgrimage peregrinación to Sacramento in early 1966. And of course, his famous picture, when he broke that 25-day fast in 1968, he invited Senator Robert Kennedy, that's his wife Helen, to the left of, as we look at it, from Senator Kennedy. And Senator Kennedy was now from New York, after he had been the Attorney General under President Kennedy. Had come to the support of the farm workers, and he had supported the farm workers. He came to part of a subcommittee that held hearings in Delano about the conditions of the farm workers, and he came out very strongly for him. If you look close enough, you see that Senator Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, is wearing a UFW button. So they became close allies, both in ways spiritual allies, but also political allies. Cesar knew that he could not win the strike simply by through the workers or by the support of Chicanos, Mexican Americans, and the Latinos. He needed other allies. He needed to reach out, especially to liberal Democrats. And so his alliance with Senator Kennedy is part of that reaching out. Cesar believed in coalition politics. That's why in that earlier quote that I mentioned, he said, I don't support nationalism, meaning, yeah, I support the Chicano movement, but I support also in coalition politics, in reaching out and working with many other people. And so this is a representative of that coalition politics. A very powerful image, because here you have in Cesar, a poor farm worker, Mexican-American Catholic, and here you have Senator Kennedy representing one of the most powerful Catholic, Irish Catholic families in the country. But it's an alliance of, not only a political alliance, but in some ways it's a spiritual alliance, and they're coming together by Senator Kennedy taking communion with Cesar and breaking the fast by taking Holy Communion. Another spiritual moment. This is speaking in a congregation, a church. Reflecting up on the mountaintop. Taking communion with Ethel Kennedy, with Jesse Jackson, Reverend Jesse Jackson. This is at the funeral. At the funeral. And why did I have that suit? It was a hot, dusty Delano day. I think I had to throw that suit away afterwards. I couldn't even be dry cleaned. You know, it was, I don't know. I was telling people that much just because, here was Cesar died in 1993, and so I went with some of the graduate students and one of my colleagues, Sargos Vargas, from San Salvador, Delano. I said, well, I'm going to a funeral. I should, dress up like I'm going to a funeral, right? But no. It wasn't that kind of, my colleague over here, Sargos Vargas, and our two graduate students, they knew better how to go dress for that hot, dusty day. My suit was just a disaster after that. But That was an incredible day, of course. Thousands of people were there to pay homage to Cesar. It was like a reunion of the farm workers' struggle. Well, there's a wonderful picture. I cherish it. It's in the book. It's in the book. This is Cesar on one of his many visits to UC Santa Barbara and to Santa Barbara. He often would go to Santa Barbara Mission on retreats. And on this one occasion, he had spoken at UC Santa Barbara, and then he spoke at the community center at La Casa de la Raza. And my wife Ellen took this picture, that's why she's not in it. I assume that's she's alive. But I'm here with our two children. And Cesar's taking a picture with my two kids. Of course, they're much older now. But Juliana over here, looks like she's not sure what's going on. What's going on here. And Carlo, my son, who's now a doctor, looks like he's about ready to cry or something worse. But it's a wonderful picture. I cherish it, and I include it in the book. But the quote on death, which I think is very powerful and almost kind of prophesies his own death, he said, "Death comes to us all, and we do not get to choose the time or the circumstances of our dying. The hardest thing of all is to die rightly. In my opinion, César Chávez died rightly." Thank you very much. I guess we'll entertain maybe some of your own reflections or things that you may want to share. You're also about César Chávez that you've not had a chance to do, or questions about what I just delivered. So, yes, sir.